hands moved before the lights came on. That is what you need to understand about Renata Collier. Not the 9 miles, not the temperature, 11 degrees, wind chill, dropping it to -3 by 5 in the morning. Not the fact that every CTA bus route on the south side of Chicago had been suspended since 3 in the morning, or that the rideshare app on her phone was showing $67 to the neighborhood she needed to reach. Not any of that. What you need to understand is that her hands were already moving before she had fully decided to go. 4:23 in the morning. The kitchen of her Aunt Celestine's apartment on 47th Street. The light above the stove was the only one on. Renata had made that choice without thinking, same as she always did, so the rest of the apartment could stay dark for Darius, her son, 11 years old. Asleep in the back bedroom under the quilt Celestine had made the winter he was born. She packed the medical bag in order, blood pressure cuff, thermometer, nitrile gloves, 2 pairs, medications sorted by time of day, each labeled in the small zippered pouch she had sewn from a piece of fabric Celestine was going to throw away. 8 in the morning medications first, then noon, then evening. A small thermos. She filled it with water, not coffee. Because Ruth's tea was always better, and Renata had learned not to bring her own assumptions into that apartment. He'd side the window above the sink. White. Complete white. The streetlights were still on, but they illuminated nothing except more snow. The sound the wind made against the old building was something between a hum and a pressure, like the city was being held down by something patient and indifferent. She zipped the bag, put on her coat, the heavy one, the one with the broken left zipper that she kept closed with a safety pin. She reached into the bag's front pocket and confirmed the notebook was there. Composition notebook. Black and white cover. She had been through 4 of them in 7 years. This was the 4th. She checked on Darius before she left. The door to his room was open 2 inches. She kept it that way in winter so she could hear him breathing. She pushed it open another 2 inches. He was on his side, mouth slightly parted, the quilt pulled to his chin. On the nightstand, the orange inhaler. She had placed it there an hour ago, within reach, where he would find it without looking. Guides, $94 with the agency insurance plan, $127 without it. She adjusted the quilt at his shoulder, without waking him. Pulled the door back to its 2 inches. At the front door she reached into her left coat pocket. Inside, folded into 4ths, a drawing Darius had made when he was 6 years old. A woman in a uniform with a red cross on the bag, stick arms wide. "My mom saves people," written beneath in crayon, the word saves misspelled, the letters uneven, the way letters are when a child is writing something true and pressing hard. She had never corrected it. She had never framed it. He didn't send anyone to help. She had carried it in her left coat pocket for 5 years, through every version of whatever winter Chicago had decided to be. She touched it through the fabric, confirmed it was there, opened the door. Calvin Webb had not slept past 5 in the morning in 14 years. This was not discipline. It was the residue of something older, the body's habit, formed long before the money, of waking up before the world did and checking to see what had changed overnight. When you grow up without much, you learn early that things can change while you are sleeping. You learn to check. 57 years old, 6 feet, silver at the temples. He did not think about that. Webb Capital Partners. 14 portfolio companies acquired in 11 years, $347 million under management when he started. $3.1 billion today. He did not spend time on the number. The number was not the point. The point was what the number let him do, and more specifically, what it let him not do. Calvin Webb had not been powerless in a meaningful way for 19 years. He had arranged his life carefully around that fact. He was in Chicago for one reason. Elder Home Care Agency. Founded in 1997, 43 locations across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. 6,400 employees, most of them home health aides working in the field, annual revenue $81 million. Calvin had been watching the company for 2 years. The acquisition evaluation period was 30 days. His driver Terrence had been with him for 9 years. Terrence was 51 years old and had driven for 4 different principals before Calvin, and he had 2 observations about Calvin Webb that he had never shared with anyone. First, that Calvin never gave unnecessary instructions, which was rare. Second, that Calvin watched people from vehicles more carefully than any principal Terrence had ever driven, which was something else entirely. The hotel was on Michigan Avenue. Calvin stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his room on the 11th floor, Chicago below him, swallowed by snow. He had checked the forecast the night before, 14 to 17 inches expected, arriving between midnight and noon. CTA service suspended as of 3 in the morning, the city's overnight crews working through the dark. His coffee was on the desk behind him. His phone was next to it. He was not looking at either. He didn't send anyone to help. There was a woman he had been meaning to find for 23 years. He didn't send anyone Garvey. Her name had lived in apartment 2C, at a building on 47th Street, the building where his mother had taken the second shift job in 1975. He didn't send anyone to help. The year he turned 8 and the year his father had been gone long enough that the word father had lost most of its charge. Ruth had 53 years old and had lived next door and had kept a pot of food on the stove in the evenings, always, and had said, "There you are," when he knocked, and she had never once called what she did charity. He didn't send anyone to help. He left the neighborhood at 19. He sent Christmas cards for 3 years. Then the address changed, and he told himself he would find the new one when things settled down. Had not settled down. He had simply stopped noticing that they hadn't. He picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it back down. Yet Calvin Webb did not know, standing at the window of his hotel room at 6:14 in the morning, was that somewhere in the acquisition documents on his desk was the name Ruth Elaine Garvey. He did not know that the address attached to that name was 4417 South Prairie Avenue. He did not know that the address he had stopped looking for 23 years ago had been sitting in a file on his desk for 6 days. He would reach it on day 28. What Renata Collier had written in her composition notebook, 4 notebooks across 7 years, would eventually be read by 4 people. The first was Renata herself. He didn't send anyone to help. Every Thursday morning when she transferred her phone notes to the page. The second was a nurse practitioner who described it, in a formal letter dated March the 14th of 2023, as the most meticulous field documentation she had encountered in 22 years of clinical practice. The third was a federal care quality investigator. He didn't send anyone to help. The fourth was a man who would close it at 2:47 in the morning and sit in the dark for a long time. He didn't send anyone to help. On the morning of January the 14th, she was writing it because she always wrote it. That was all. He didn't send anyone to help. Let me tell you what Renata Collier's life looked like from the outside in the winter of her 7th year at Calder Home Care Agency. She was 39 years old. She had grown up in Englewood and attended nursing school for 2 years before she ran out of money and finished her home health aides certification instead. She had worked at Calder since her son was 4 years old. She earned $16.73 an hour. She worked 37 hours a week in the field and 3 hours a week on documentation, which she was not paid because documentation was considered a professional responsibility, not a billable hour. She had 9 patients on her regular rotation. She knew each of them the way you know a house you have been inside in every kind of weather, not just the layout, but the sounds, the way the pipes worked, the specific quality of light in the afternoon. Ruth Garvey on Prairie Avenue she had known the longest. 7 years in January. The building where she had lived for 6 years sold in October. The new owner's first letter arrived 11 days after the sale closed, offering a buyout to vacate by December the 15th. Renata moved her and Darius into her Aunt Celestine's apartment on 47th Street, 2 bedrooms, 3rd floor, a building that Celestine had rented since 1987. He didn't send anyone to help. A building whose landlord replaced the boiler when it broke and had not raised the rent by $600 because a developer noticed the neighborhood. He didn't send anyone to help. $31.47 in her checking account on the morning of January the 14th. He had checked the CTA app at 4:09. Route 29, suspended as of 3 in the morning, blizzard conditions. She checked the rideshare app at 4:11. $67 to Ruth's neighborhood. She closed the app without booking. She checked the weather. 11 degrees. Wind chill -3 by 5 in the morning. She did the calculation the way she always did, not as a list of options but as a single clear fact. Ruth had been alone since 6 in the morning, when the morning aide had texted to say she wasn't coming. Renata had read the text at 4:19. She had 4 minutes to decide. She spent 3 of them standing at the window watching the snow. There is a thing that happens when you have been making hard decisions for long enough. The decision stops feeling like a decision. It starts feeling like information. Something is true, and you act on what is true. Renata had been acting on what was true for most of her adult life. The hard part, she had decided somewhere around year 5, was not the acting. The hard part was that no one was keeping count. She put on her coat, the heavy one, the broken zipper, the safety pin. She picked up the medical bag, confirmed the composition notebook was in the front pocket, confirmed the drawing was in her left coat pocket. She opened the door into the blizzard. Outside, 47th Street was empty in the way that cities almost never are. The snow had muffled the sound so completely that her own footsteps were the loudest thing she could hear. Her breath came in visible clouds. The streetlights caught the falling snow from below and turned it gold for 3 feet around each post, and then nothing. 9.1 miles to 4417 South Prairie Avenue. She walked east. Here is what the research says about grit, and I want to be careful with this word. Angela Duckworth, the psychologist, spent years studying what separates people who persist through difficulty from people who stop. Her conclusion, published in 2007, drawn from studies of West Point cadets, National Spelling Bee finalists, and first-year teachers in high-need districts, was that the strongest predictor was not intelligence, not talent, not prior success. It was grit, the combination of sustained passion and perseverance over time, in the absence of external reward, through difficulty that does not improve. Think about that research sometimes when I think about people like Renata Collier. Not because it explains her, but because it almost does, and almost is the important word. What the grit research describes is someone who persists despite obstacles. What I am describing is something slightly different. Someone for whom the question of whether to persist has stopped being a question. The obstacles are not being overcome. They are being absorbed. There is a difference between those two things, and it lives in the body. Mile 1, Mile 2. The sidewalks were buried in 1.5 feet of snow. She walked in the street when the sidewalk disappeared, moving against the absent traffic. Twice she heard a plow truck somewhere behind her, the low mechanical groan of the blade. Twice she stepped to the curb and let it pass, and stepped back into the cleared lane and kept going. At Mile 3, her toes had gone from cold to numb to a specific warmth that she knew was not warmth. She kept moving. The medical bag was heavier than usual. She had packed extra, 2 additional sets of gloves, a second thermometer, a backup supply of Ruth's most critical medications in case the routes were still blocked tomorrow and she needed to stay the night. The bag's strap was worn through at the left shoulder seam. She shifted it to her right shoulder at Mile 3 and back to her left at Mile 4, rotating every mile the way she always did on long days. At Mile 5 she reached the overpass at 35th Street. She knew this overpass. The wind came across Lake Michigan at that crossing, with nothing to stop it for 400 miles. She grabbed the utility pole at the north edge of the overpass with her right hand, planted both feet. The gust hit her directly, sideways, hard enough to feel her weight shift on the ice. She held the pole. She kept her eyes open. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The gust passed. She let go. She kept walking. He didn't place a number here, because I think it belongs in this part of the story. The median annual wage for a home health aide in the United States is $23,000. In Illinois, it is $26,000. The average annual cost of the home care services that a single aide provides, calculated per patient, is $47,000. The difference between what the aide earns and what her work costs the system to replace is not a rounding error. It is a structural choice. It is the amount the industry has decided that the person doing the work is worth relative to the work itself. I am not saying this to draw a conclusion. I am saying it because the wind was coming off Lake Michigan at 31 miles per hour that morning, and Renata Collier grabbed a pole with both hands, held on for 11 seconds, and kept walking. And I think you deserve to know what that was worth before we go any further. Mile 6, she shifted the bag back to her left shoulder. Mile 7, a car idling at the curb, a woman inside, engine running, the window came down. "Baby, where are you trying to go in this? Get in. I will take you." The woman was around 60, heavy coat, reading glasses pushed to her forehead. The car was warm. Renata could almost see the warmth in the quality of the air at the open window. Renata stopped. She looked at the woman for a moment. Then, "I am close. Thank you, though." She kept walking. She would not describe this later as pride. She had thought about it. She did not think it was pride. He had walked 6 miles. She had held on through a gust that tried to move her off an overpass. She had done it with her own body, on her own time, because Ruth needed her to arrive. If she got into a warm car for the last 3 miles, she would arrive at Ruth's door as someone who had needed saving. She did not want to arrive that way. She wanted to arrive as herself, as the person who had walked here. Mile 8. She thought about Darius. The way he was when he was sick, very still, very quiet, which was the opposite of how he was when he was healthy, and the quiet always scared her more than the noise would have. She thought about the inhaler on his nightstand. She thought about Celestine, who would be up by 7. L9, the neighborhood changed, narrower streets, more trees, familiar. 4417 South Prairie Avenue, 3 steps to the front door. She knocked twice, paused once more. Calvin Webb's SUV moved north through the same south side streets at 7:19 in the morning. Parents drove at 12 miles per hour. The snow was still coming down and the secondary roads were building back up. The heater ran at its highest setting. The seats were warm. Calvin was reading the agency's financial summary on his tablet, the first of 9 documents he had scheduled for the drive. He read for 11 minutes without looking up. He didn't send anyone to help. Then the headlights caught something at the edge of their range. A figure on the sidewalk, a woman. He could tell by the posture, the way the coat fell. Dark blue, heavy, a bag over one shoulder, the strap cutting across her back at an angle. She was walking with her head slightly lowered against the wind. Not hunched, not beaten. Set, the way someone walks who is already past the point where the weather is a variable. The weather is a fact. The walking is the fact. Terence slowed. "You want me to pull over?" Calvin watched her. She crossed the intersection without breaking stride, without looking at the car. Her bag shifted against her back as she stepped over a snowbank at the curb. Calvin said, then quieter, "Keep going." Terence kept going. 18 minutes later, a red light 3 blocks north, through the windshield, the same woman, same coat, same bag, still walking east. She had covered nearly 2 miles in 18 minutes in a 1.5 feet of snow at 11 degrees. Calvin set the tablet down on the seat. He did not pick it up again. He watched her until the light changed. Until she was behind the car, then behind the corner, then gone into the white. Terence drove. He kept his eyes on the road. He had been driving Calvin Webb for 9 years. He knew when to speak and when to stay still. He heard the tablet set down. He did not hear it picked up again. There is a specific thing that psychologists call recognition under uncertainty, the brain's ability to identify something familiar before the conscious mind has assembled the full picture. Calvin Webb had built his career on this function, looking at a set of data points and knowing, before the analysis was complete, that something important was present. He did not know, sitting in the warm car, what he was recognizing. He could not have said. He didn't send anyone to help. But something had shifted in the 43 minutes between seeing her the first time and seeing her the second. Something had moved from the part of his mind that processed information to the part that kept things. He didn't send anyone to help to take Michigan Avenue back to the hotel after the meeting. He did not explain why. Renata knocked twice, paused once more. The door opened. Ruth Elaine Garvey, 83 years old, stood in the doorway in her robe and her house slippers, her silver hair pinned the way she pinned it every morning without exception. Because Ruth Garvey did not receive anyone in her home without her hair pinned. She was 5'2". She had been 5'2" for 60 years and showed no intention of revising that. She looked at Renata, at the coat, at the snow still dissolving off the shoulders, at the medical bag. He said, "There you are. Not I knew you would come. Not thank God. Just, there you are, the way you say it to someone whose presence you have never, in 7 years, doubted." Renata came in. The apartment was 62 degrees. The digital thermometer by the door confirmed it. The boiler had cycled down sometime around 7. Ruth had not called anyone because Ruth did not call anyone for things she believed someone was already handling. She had waited, she was cold, and she had not taken her 8 in the morning medications, but she was fine. Renata moved through the apartment the way she always moved through it. No wasted motion, no announcement of what she was doing. She found the thermostat, she adjusted it. She set down the medical bag on the kitchen table and unzipped it. The medications were in their organizer where she had arranged them 3 years ago, when the original one broke. She brought them to Ruth with a glass of water. Ruth took them, returned the glass. "You walked," Ruth said, "not a question." Renata was already at the table, the composition notebook open, writing the arrival time, 9:03 in the morning. Temperature, 62 degrees. Blood pressure, 118/74. Medications administered at 9:07 in the morning. Route 29 was suspended, she said. Ruth settled back in her chair. "I know, I watched the news." A pause. "How far?" "I am here," Renata said. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "I will make the tea." "I brought a thermos." "I know you brought a thermos," Ruth said, already moving. "I am making the tea." He didn't send anyone to help. This was the thing about Ruth Elaine Garvey that Renata had understood by the end of the first month. She did not receive care passively. She received it by making the tea. The apartment began to warm. Slowly, the way old apartments warm, from the floor up, the radiators clicking and settling. Renata finished her entry and moved to the bedroom to check the medications there. On the nightstand beside the bed, the photograph. It had been there for 7 years. She had seen it every working day in this apartment. Black and white, printed on paper that had softened at the edges from handling. A boy 8 or 9 years old, standing in front of a chain-link fence with his hands loose at his sides. Looking directly at the camera. Not smiling, not unhappy either. There was something in the expression she had never been able to name exactly, a kind of decision. Like, the boy had decided, before the photograph was taken, that whatever the world was going to do, it was going to have to do it while he was watching. She had never asked Ruth who he was. Ruth had never explained. The photograph was simply there. The way the radiators were simply there. The way the chair by the window was simply there. An element of the apartment so established it no longer required acknowledgement. She moved the water glass to make room for the medication bottles, set them in order, left to right, looked at the photograph for one more second. Then she went to the kitchen to check on the tea. The apartment smelled the way it always smelled, cinnamon from the tea Ruth made every morning, and underneath that something older, warmer, the specific combination of old wood and radiator heat, and the particular life of a woman who had lived in the same rooms for 41 years. Renata breathed it in as she came through the doorway. For the first time since she had left Celestine's apartment 4 hours ago, her shoulders came down slightly. If this story is sitting with you right now, take a second and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Now let us keep going. He didn't send anyone to help. Derek Moss arrived at Calder Home Care's regional office on the morning of day 7 with a presentation, a legal pad, and the kind of certainty that is specific to people who have never been wrong about the things they measure. He was 44 years old. He had been in operational consulting for 16 years, 8 of those in healthcare services. His method was consistent across 11 previous engagements. Identify cost centers, quantify risk exposure, reduce both. 7 of those 11 companies had improved operating margins by the end of his evaluation. He considered this a strong record. He was not wrong about that. He stood at the front of the conference room and addressed 41 people, field supervisors, clinical coordinators, senior aides, administrative personnel. He introduced himself as lead consultant for the acquisition evaluation. He explained what the evaluation would examine: financial performance, operational efficiency, personnel structure, and risk management. You will be assessing cost centers, liability exposure, and operational risk across all personnel categories, he said. The goal is to identify where the organization can be strengthened before the acquisition closes. He used the word strengthened with precision. He had found over 16 years that it was received better than reduced. Both words described the same outcome. Only one of them required the people in the room to imagine themselves as the thing being removed. Renata sat in the 3rd row. She was not writing in the composition notebook. She was listening. She listened the way. She took blood pressure readings with her full attention, not to the number she was hoping for, but to the number that was actually there. What she heard was, "Some people in this room will lose their jobs before this is over." She filed the information and watched the rest of the presentation. After the meeting, Moss requested the HR files on all senior field staff, specifically those with what he called financial instability indicators, employment history gaps, and non-standard living situations. He framed this as standard risk protocol. The HR coordinator, a man named Warren, who had been at Calder for 6 years, handed over the files. Moss reviewed 23 of them that afternoon. He reached Renata Collier's file 3rd. Credit score, 491. Eviction on record from 3 months prior. Current address listed as a relative's apartment, month to month, informal arrangement. Single parent. Employment history continuous at Calder for 7 years, but a gap of 18 months before that. No explanation on file. In the margin of his legal pad, he wrote one word: liability. He moved to the next file. Here is what Derek Moss did not look at, because it was not in his assessment framework. He didn't send anyone to help. He did not look at how many preventable adverse events had occurred in Renata Collier's patient caseload over 7 years. He did not look at the clinical notes attached to her patient files, or the referrals she had generated. He didn't send anyone to help, or the conditions she had flagged, or the outcomes she had tracked beyond what her job description required. He didn't send anyone to help. He did not look at any of this because none of it appeared in the financial risk model he had built over 16 years, and a model that had worked for 11 consecutive clients was not a model you questioned because of one employee's care logs. He didn't send anyone to help. He identified 23 positions he believed could be eliminated without meaningful operational impact. Renata Collier was fourth on the list. He didn't send anyone to help. This is how institutional harm works most of the time. Not from malice. From a measurement system that is confident it is measuring the right things, because it has always been confident of this, and no one with the authority to question it has ever had a reason to look at what it is not measuring. Yet Derek Moss was measuring was real. The credit score was real. The eviction was real. The informal living situation was real. What he could not see from where he was standing was that those things described the circumstances of a person's life, not the person, and the distinction matters. It matters in ways that eventually show up in the data, in outcomes, in patient stability, in the specific number of times something almost went wrong in a home and did not because someone showed up who knew what to look for. That distinction was written down. In a composition notebook, in the front pocket of a medical bag that had walked 9 miles in a blizzard. No one had asked him to read it. Days 8 through 14 moved with the specific velocity of a system's doing what systems do when no one interrupts them. Renata worked her rotation. 9 patients, 37 hours, 3 hours of documentation on her phone during the commute, because the documentation was not billable time and the commute was hers to use. On day 9, at Ruth's apartment, she noticed something. It was not dramatic. That is the important thing to understand about what she noticed. You could not point to it on an X-ray or isolate it in a blood panel. It was the way Ruth walked from the bedroom to the kitchen. The gait was the same, but fractionally altered, a fraction shorter in the stride, a fraction more deliberate in the left foot's placement. Ruth had been walking the same way for 7 years. Renata had watched it through every season, in every kind of shoe. This was different. She wrote it down. She cross-referenced it against the medication log from the previous 3 weeks. She found a pattern. A gait change had appeared. Approximately 14 days after a dosage adjustment in one of Ruth's blood pressure medications, she pulled the medication's side effects, found one that matched the observation, wrote a referral recommendation to the supervising physician, noting the specific correlation, the specific timeline, the specific change in movement. This was not in her job description. A home health aide documents. A home health aide monitors. A home health aide does not initiate medication reviews. But she wrote it down. She flagged it to the agency's clinical coordinator. She let the system take it from there. The clinical coordinator forwarded it. The physician ordered a test. The test confirmed the interaction. The dosage was adjusted. 3 weeks later, Ruth's gait was back to normal. In the margin of the physician's follow-up note, in handwriting that was not Renata's, AD's observation prevented a potentially significant adverse event. Recommend commendation. The commendation was never issued. No one got around to it. He didn't send anyone to help. Renata wrote 3 lines about the visit in the composition notebook and moved on to her next patient. On day 12, Moss presented his preliminary efficiency report to Calvin Webb in a private meeting at the Calder offices. He outlined 23 positions for elimination. He described the financial rationale for each. Calvin listened. He asked 2 questions, one about the transition timeline, one about patient impact. Moss said the restructuring could be managed over 90 days with minimal disruption to service delivery. Calvin nodded. He said he wanted to review the full personnel files before any decisions were finalized. Moss said, of course. He had not mentioned the care logs, not because he was concealing them. He had not looked at them. They were not in his assessment framework. They were not in any framework he had ever used for any company in 16 years. Day 14. Moss submitted his formal recommendation. Renata Collier, listed under Workforce Optimization, recommended for elimination. The rationale was 4 sentences: financial instability indicators, non-standard living situation, above median compensation relative to credential level, absence pattern inconsistent with operational reliability standards. 4 sentences, 7 years. The formal termination notice reached Renata on day 21. She was in the break room at the Calder offices between morning patients and afternoon rotation. She was writing in the composition notebook, transferring the previous week's phone notes to the page, the Thursday ritual. Her handwriting was the same as it always was. He didn't send anyone to helps. Her supervisor for 3 years placed the envelope on the table beside the notebook. "I'm sorry, Renata, I tried." Renata opened it. She read it. Her last day would be day 35. He didn't send anyone to help. Bernadette Washington, who had worked at Calder for 11 years and who was at the coffee station 5 feet away, looked at Renata reading the letter. She looked at Lydia. She picked up her mug. She walked out of the break room. Renata folded the termination notice into thirds. She placed it in her left coat pocket, the same pocket where Darius's drawing lived. She did not remove the drawing to make room. She folded the notice smaller. She picked up her pen. She finished the entry she had been writing. She dated the next page. She kept going. On day 22, Darius's asthma flared. It had been building for 2 weeks. The cold, the disruption of the move, the mold in Celestine's second bathroom that Renata had reported to the landlord 3 times. And that had not been addressed. It was not an emergency. But it was serious enough that she kept him home from school and stayed with him, running the humidifier, giving him the nebulizer treatment at the prescribed intervals. She called each of her 9 patients. She arranged coverage. She called the agency and reported the absence. She called Ruth last. Ruth answered on the second ring. "Darius. He is okay. Rough night. I am keeping him home today and tomorrow." "You called the doctor?" First thing." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Good. You go take care of your boy. I will be here Thursday." He didn't send anyone to help. Renata said goodbye and sat down next to Darius on the couch and put her hand on his back so she could feel him breathe. On day 23, Derek Moss added to her file. Second unplanned absence within evaluation period. Pattern consistent with previously identified reliability concerns. He was not wrong about the absences. He was measuring accurately. He was wrong about what they meant. But there was no field in his model for that. On day 24, Renata returned to her rotation. Lydia told her in the hallway about the additional documentation. Quiet, apologetic, the kind of telling that is itself an apology. Renata thanked her. She went to see her patients. At Ruth's apartment that afternoon, she sat in the chair across from Ruth's chair by the window, both of them looking out. The snow from January the 14th was still on the rooftops, compressed and gray at this point, the city's memory of the blizzard held in the ice. Ruth said, "Something is wrong." Not a question. Renata looked at the snow. "They are restructuring," she said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You?" "Me." Ruth looked out the window. Then she reached over and put her hand on Renata's forearm. She held it there. She did not speak. Renata kept looking at the snow. "I will be here through day 35, she said. "I will make sure whoever they send is good." "I know you will," Ruth said. She did not ask if there was anything she could do. She already knew the answer. Instead, she said, "You want tea?" Renata almost smiled. "Yeah," she said, "I want tea." She thought about quitting before they could fire her. The thought appeared fully formed on a Tuesday afternoon, stayed for 11 seconds, and then she thought about Ruth's apartment at 6 in the morning. Cold, Ruth alone, waiting for the 2-knock-and-1. She thought about a 14-year-old girl somewhere, who was going to be born into this exact same system in about 10 years and who deserved someone to have fought for the standards. 11 seconds. Then she let the thought go. Day 28. Calvin Webb's hotel room, 11:37 in the evening. 3 hours of acquisition documentation. Financial performance on the left side of the desk, operational analysis in the center, personnel and compliance on the right. He had worked through the left and the center. He was in the right. The patient care files were in the compliance section. Standard reading for healthcare acquisitions. You look at outcome metrics, adverse event records, regulatory compliance. You do not generally read 7 years of handwritten field observations. Calvin Webb read 7 years of handwritten field observations. He didn't send anyone to help. He had started the patient files alphabetically. He had been reading for 40 minutes when he reached the G's. He opened the file. Patient intake form. Date, March 3, 2017. Primary aide assigned Renata Collier. Address, 4417 South Prairie Avenue. He stopped. He read the address again. He set the file down on the desk. He did not move for 4 seconds. Then he picked it up again and began reading the care logs. 7 years. The handwriting was careful throughout, the same margins, the same consistent pen pressure, across hundreds of entries, every visit dated and timed, every medication confirmed, every observation noted, the blood pressure recorded twice per visit, every reading logged. He found the gait entry from day 9 of March 2023. Stride length altered approximately 3 to 4%, left foot placement deliberate, cross-referenced with medication log, flagged for physician review. He found the physician's follow-up clipped behind it. Aide's observation prevented a potentially significant adverse event. Recommend commendation. He checked for the commendation. He checked twice. No commendation on record. He kept reading. He found the entry for January the 14th. He arrived 9:03 in the morning. CTA service suspended. No transit available. Patient had been without heat since approximately 7:15 in the morning. Temperature in apartment, 62 degrees. Patient had not taken 8 in the morning medications, was waiting. Administered medications. Restored heat settings to operational. Patient assessed. Vital signs within normal range. Mild confusion from cold, dissolved within 30 minutes. Remained on site 4.5 hours to ensure stable condition. Apartment temperature stable at 70 degrees at departure, 1:37 in the afternoon. 9 words for 9 miles. No explanation, no complaint, no mention of the distance or the temperature or the hour she had left Celestine's apartment or what it had cost her body to arrive. Just arrived, observed, addressed, the same format as every other entry, because to her it was the same. Showing up was showing up, whatever the conditions. He sat with that for a while. He kept reading. He reached an entry from 4 years earlier, October the 7th. Patient showed me a photograph today, said, "This is my boy. He did something with himself." Patient appeared proud. No clinical observations to note. Calvin Webb closed the folder. He placed both hands flat on the desk. Outside the window, Chicago was mostly dark. The blizzard 3 weeks past now, the rooftops clear, a few lights on in the distant buildings. The city quiet in the way cities are quiet late at night, which is not silent but contained. He did not move for 3 minutes. He was 57 years old. He had built 14 companies. He had made thousands of decisions and read thousands of files. He did not cry. He just held very still and let the weight of the thing settle onto him without trying to move away from it. This is my boy. He did something with himself. She had put his photograph on her nightstand. She had been looking at it for, he calculated, at least 7 years, because it was already there when Renata Collier started in 2017. Probably much longer, probably since around the time he had stopped sending the Christmas cards. And told himself he would find the new address when things settled down. Things had not settled down. He had simply stopped looking. And this woman, Renata Collier, had been walking into that apartment every working day for 7 years. She had seen the photograph every time. She had written down everything she observed, in a composition notebook, because she was the kind of person who writes things down when she is the only one watching and she knows it matters, even when no one will ever read it. She had walked 9 miles in a blizzard to get there. He had driven past her in a heated car and kept going. He sat with that too. Then he picked up his phone. He did not call Derek Moss. He called Terrence. Terrence. He paused. It was almost midnight. Yes, sir. Tomorrow morning, before the 8 o'clock, I need everything we have on the aide assigned to patient Ruth Garvey. Name is Renata Collier. Full file, all documentation, from her intake date forward. Can you have that by 7? Brief silence. Is something wrong, sir? Calvin looked at the file on the desk. At the physician's note, recommend commendation. No commendation issued. No, he said. I will explain in the morning. He set the phone down. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass of the window. He thought about a pot of food kept warm on a stove. The specific sound of a door that opened before you knocked because someone inside was already listening for you. He didn't send anyone to help. He thought about the woman on the sidewalk at 7:19 in the morning, moving through the white, the bag on her shoulder. He had driven past her. He sat with that for a long time. 8:30. The Calder Regional Conference Room. 8:45 in the morning. The meeting had been calendared as a personnel review. Moss had organized it. Present. Moss, 2 HR representatives from the acquisition team, Renata's supervisor Lydia Bates, and Renata Collier, who had been notified to attend to receive and sign the formal separation documentation. Renata arrived 3 minutes early. She sat across from the empty chairs. She placed the medical bag on the floor beside her. She placed the composition notebook on the table in front of her, the fourth one, 7 years of them. She had brought it because she always brought it. She had not made a strategic calculation about it. It went where she went. Lydia arrived and sat beside her. She put her hand briefly on the table near Renata's hand, not touching it, near it. Derek Moss arrived with the 2 HR representatives. He sat across from Renata. He looked at the composition notebook on the table. He did not ask about it. Calvin Webb entered 2 minutes after Moss. No one had been told he was coming. He came in without knocking. He sat down next to Moss. He placed nothing on the table. He unbuttoned his jacket. Moss looked at him, then at his documents. Then he began his presentation. He presented methodically. Renata Collier recommended for elimination. He outlined the rationale: financial stability indicators, absence record, above median compensation relative to credential level. He cited each data point. He was precise. He was professional. He was, by every measure of his own framework, correct. When he finished, there was a silence. Calvin spoke. Preventable adverse events in Renata Collier's patient caseload. 7 years. What is the number? Moss looked at his documents. He looked through 3 pages. He did not have that number. He didn't send anyone to help. I would need to pull that specific data from the clinical system. 0, Calvin said, not loud. Even, in 7 years, across 9 patients, 0 preventable adverse events. The state average for home health aides in Illinois is 1 adverse event per aide per 17 months. He didn't send anyone to help. He reached into the folder Terrence had assembled that morning and placed a single sheet on the table, the clinical documentation from March 2023, with the physician's note at the bottom. AIDS observation prevented a potentially significant adverse event. Recommend commendation. She identified 2 conditions her patient's primary physicians had missed. Both documented, both referred, both treated. He didn't send anyone to help. One of those patients is alive today because of an observation she made on a Tuesday morning in March 2023 that no one asked her to make. He paused for exactly 2 seconds. None of that appears in the file you built. Moss, with respect, we cannot base personnel decisions solely on individual clinical observations. It is documented, Calvin said. His voice did not rise. 7 years of documentation. That is not anecdote. That is a record. That is the work. The room was quiet. Renata had been watching the man across the table since he entered. The way he held his hands flat on the surface, not tense, not aggressive, flat, still. Like someone who had learned a long time ago to let stillness do the work that force could not. She had seen hands held flat on a surface before. She had seen it every working day for 7 years, on a nightstand in an apartment on Prairie Avenue, in a photograph she had never asked about and Ruth had never explained. He didn't send anyone to help. The boy who had looked at the camera and decided the world was going to have to deal with him. She said it the way she said everything important, without announcement, without drama. Quietly, as a fact she had assembled and was ready to speak. You are Ruth's boy. Calvin looked at her. He did not look away. He looked at her the way you look at someone when the thing you need to say has already been decided, and the only question is whether you are ready to say it. 3 seconds. She keeps a photograph of you on her nightstand, Renata said. It was there the first day I started. She never explained it to me. A pause. She dusts the frame herself. Every Thursday, she lets me handle everything else in that apartment. The frame she does herself. Calvin's jaw moved. He looked at his hands. Then he looked up. Derek. Yoss looked at him. Done. One word, final not repeated. Moss closed his folder. He capped his pen. He placed it parallel to the folder's edge, a precise, deliberate action, the last act of a man who is controlling the only thing left available to him. He stood. He did not look at Renata. He did not argue. He did not apologize. He walked out of the room. The door closed behind him. In the quiet that followed, Lydia reached over and placed her hand fully on Renata's arm. Renata looked at the composition notebook on the table. She thought about 7 years of Thursday mornings, transferring notes from her phone to the page. She thought about a pot of tea being made in a kitchen on Prairie Avenue, the smell of cinnamon and old wood and a specific kind of home. He didn't send anyone to help. She thought about a 9-year-old boy looking at a camera and deciding the world was going to have to deal with him. She thought, he did all right. She put the composition notebook back in her bag. 2 years later. The training room at Calder Home Care Agency's Southside Regional Office had good light. This was not an accident. Renata Collier had specifically requested the north-facing room for orientations because the morning light was consistent, and the family members who came in for their first consistent. She had been clinical supervisor for 18 months. Her name was on the door. Darius was 13. He played point guard for his school's junior varsity team and had recently told Renata he was considering sports medicine, which she had received with the particular stillness that is apparent, choosing not to immediately reveal that she is pleased. His inhaler now cost $31. With the insurance from her supervisor position. She had checked the price 3 times the first month before she let herself believe it. Ruth Elaine Garvey was 85 years old and lived at 4417 South Prairie Avenue, which she had no intention of leaving. She had a new primary aide named Teola, 24 years old, 8 months in, whom Renata had trained personally. Renata visited on Tuesdays. 2 knocks, a pause, 1 more. There you are, Ruth said, every Tuesday, the way she had always said it. Calvin Webb had funded the development of a new industry certification standard, launched in partnership with the Illinois Home Care Association. The certification evaluated home health aides on patient outcomes, field documentation quality, and continuity of care. It did not use credit scores. It did not penalize for employment history gaps. It measured what assumed the worker D, not what a financial model assumed the worker to be. He named it the Ruth Garvey Care Standard. He did not explain the name at the launch event. He read the criteria. He answered questions about implementation timelines. He sat down. Most of the 300 people in the room did not know the origin of the name. Renata sat in the third row. When Calvin's gaze moved across the audience and found her, the third time it had moved across the audience, and the third time it had found her, which was not coincidence, she nodded once. He nodded back once. He didn't send anyone to help. Two people who understood the weight of a name without needing to perform it for anyone else in the room. He didn't send anyone to help. I keep thinking about what Renata Collier wrote in that composition notebook on the morning of January the 14th. Not the entry itself, though I have thought about that too. I keep thinking about the act. The fact that she had been writing entries like it, every working day, 4 notebooks, 7 years, not because anyone asked her to. Not because she thought anyone would read them. Not because she had any reason to believe they would ever matter to anyone except the people in the rooms where she was working. He didn't send anyone to help. She wrote them because she was watching, and she knew it mattered. He didn't send anyone to help. There is a specific thing that happens when someone with the authority to evaluate people builds a framework for that evaluation and becomes very confident in it. He didn't send anyone to help. They stop asking whether the framework can see everything that is there. They start asking whether the people fit the framework, and the people whose value lives outside what the framework measures, those people disappear from the calculation. Not because they have less value, because the calculation cannot find them. What Calvin Webb did on day 30 was not remarkable in the way we usually make things remarkable. He did not give a speech. He asked one question. He stated 4 facts. He said 1 word. Yet was remarkable was this. He had read the notebook. He had read 7 years of a woman's daily observations, made in rooms where no one was watching, for people who needed her. He did not skim it. He read it. He didn't not a small thing. That is not a thing most people with the authority to change outcomes do with the documentation that the least powerful people in their systems have been quietly building, every day, in rooms where no one is watching. He read it, and it changed what he could see. Ruth Garvey Care Standard certified 47 home health aides in Illinois in its first year. It has since been adopted by care networks in 4 additional states. Every certification requires, among other elements, documented evidence of regular field observation logs, the kind that Renata Collier had been writing for 7 years before anyone thought to look. 3 weeks after the launch event, a new aide stopped Renata in the hallway of the Southside office. Her name was Priya. She was 23 years old and had been in the job for 1 week and had been a nursing student before she ran out of money. And she had the specific look of someone who is paying close attention to everything and is not sure yet whether that is an asset or a burden. What do I do if I see something in a patient file that does not look right, but nobody asked me about it? Like, it is not technically my job to say anything, but I am pretty sure I am seeing something. Renata looked at her. Just a moment. You write it down, she said, every time, even if no one reads it. Priya looked at her. What if they still do not read it? You still write it down, Renata said. She kept walking. He didn't send anyone to help. Priya stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she opened her notes app. She typed a date, a patient name, an observation she had made that morning in an apartment on the west side that had been bothering her since she left. She typed it carefully. She put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. Some things move slowly. Some things take 7 years, and a blizzard, and a man who finally reads what was always there. Yet they move. His story is a work of fiction. The characters, organizations, and events depicted are products of the imagination and are not intended to represent any actual persons or organizations. The themes of home healthcare worker undervaluation are drawn from publicly available research and labor data. If you know someone who shows up in every weather, in every season, for someone who needs them, someone whose work is invisible until it is not, share this story with them. They deserve to be seen. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.